My name is Boba Kolechi, and this story I'm about to share is not one I heard in passing. I lived it. I watched it unfold, right here in the red dust and warm winds of our village, Kuru. Back then, Kuru was a land of peace. Hidden beyond the dense palms and whispering acacia trees, our village was a world of its own. A place where the moonlight danced on the rooftops at night, and the morning smelled of roasted yam and millet porridge. We had our ways, our laws passed from elder to elder, mother to daughter, father to son. But there was one tradition, one sacred rule that every family gathered like the village well: our daughters must remain pure until marriage. Not just by word, but by action, by spirit, by bloodline. It wasn't just about chastity, it was about honor. A family's pride rested on it. A mother could sleep with a smile knowing her daughter walked the path of decency, untouched, unspoiled. I remember the pride in Papa Adu's voice: "My Amoka is untouched." Just like all the girls of Kuru. And Mama Njidika, always boasting at the market, "Our village raises daughters, not wayward spirits like in the towns." Everyone believed it so strongly that it was stitched into the soul of Kuru. But peace, my child, peace is like the surface of still water. All it takes is one stone, one ripple, to change everything. It began with a strange misfortune. First, the goat started collapsing without warning. Then the cassava fields dried at the roots, even though the rains had not failed us. Children fell ill with fevers that wouldn't break, and the air felt heavier, like the ancestors were angry. The elders gathered in silence under the Iroko tree. They summoned Agboji, the oracle, a man whose words echoed with the voice of the spirits. He closed his eyes for what felt like hours. And then, with a heavy breath, he spoke. "The gods are displeased," he said. "They say our sacred law has been broken. The purity of our daughters has been defiled." The gas that followed his words struck the air like thunder. "But how?" Chief Oduma asked, his voice shaking. "Our daughters, our bloodline is clean." Agboji shook his head slowly. "Only a true virgin can lift this curse. The gods demand a sacrifice, carried to the sacred shrine by two maidens, untouched by man. If not, death shall bloom like weed in our soil." There was silence. Then murmurs. Then panic. But Agboji raised his staff and said, "To find the maidens, we must perform the test of purity. The necklace of Ndidi will be placed in the sacred calabash. Only a virgin, blessed in spirit and body, can pull it free." And so the word went out across Kuru: every maiden was to come forward. That next morning, the palace square overflowed with hopeful hearts and proud parents. The girls wore their best wrappers, their hair oiled and braided with cowries. One by one, they stepped forward to place their hands into the sacred calabash. But each time, the calabash came up empty. First it was Awil. Then Neoma. Then Chisem. Beautiful girls, raised in fine homes. Still, nothing. Even Chief Oduma's daughters, Ayanda, Nkeruka, and sweet little Nmo, they all tried, and failed. A cold hush fell upon the crowd. Mothers wept in confusion. Fathers clenched their fists in disbelief. Then, the whispering began. At first, the whispers were like wind rustling dry leaves, soft, uncertain. Then one voice broke the silence. "It's that city girl. Isime." I remember the name falling like a stone into still water. Isime. Yes, the one from the city, with her gold earrings that sparkled like mischief and her dresses that barely covered her knees. She had come to stay with her aunt, Mama Tola, months before the curse began. People noticed her immediately. Not just for her beauty, no, Kuru had many beautiful daughters. It was her presence. She walked like the world owed her its gaze. Even the married men couldn't help but follow her with their eyes. She doesn't greet elders properly, Mama Ebo once complained. She wears perfume that clouds the air like city smoke, muttered another. But the girls adored her. They watched her from behind cooking pots, mimicking her walk, her laughter, her boldness. Some even began tying their wrappers lower, oiling their skin with more shine, whispering about the freedom she carried. Then, a name slipped through the whispers, Eshabi, Chief Oduma's second daughter. She had been the first to copy Isime. I remember the day I saw her speaking with the traveling merchant, a young man from Ekiti with fast hands and greedy eyes. I remember thinking it was strange, the way Ashabi smiled at him, the way he slipped something into her hand behind the yam stall. Soon, more names followed, Ifinanya, Zara, Onom. They all started to carry new bangles, new scarves, food they didn't cook, coins they didn't earn. They say Isime is showing them how to get these things, someone whispered near the well. Get them from men, in secret. And that was how the darkness began to spread, not like a storm, but like smoke, unseen, creeping, suffocating. The girls had formed what they called a sisterhood. But it was not a sisterhood of wisdom or virtue. No. It was a secret path to pleasure and gifts, paved with the loss of their innocence. They met at the old mango grove at night. Men would come, some from other villages, others from our own, and Isime would pair them with the girls. She took a share of everything the men brought. In the daylight, they were our sweet daughters. But under the moonlight, they were someone else. The elders, too proud and trusting, noticed nothing. But I remember watching Isime one day. She stood at the edge of the village with a pouch in her hand and a sly smile. She was looking at Kuru like a spider in its web, watching flies drawn to the glitter. She didn't know the gods were watching too. It didn't take long before the sickness of secrets began to rot the roots of Kuru. First, the cassava fields turned yellow, as if the earth itself was mourning. Then the goats, even the strong ones, like Obi's prized ram, began to stumble and die. Children cried through the night with fevers that no herbs could cure. The rivers ran slow, the skies remained grey, and the air smelt of something foul, something wrong. Fear crawled into every household. We thought perhaps it was bad spirits from beyond the hills. But no spirit causes shame to fall upon the heads of the proud like this one did. That's when the elders summoned Agboji, the oracle. He had not spoken in moons, a man of few words, and fewer smiles. But when Agboji sat before the sacred fire, he spoke with the voice of those beyond the veil. The gods are angry, he said. Their sacred law has been broken. Kuru's daughters, once pure, now walk the path of ash. What was once pride has become pollution. Gasps rippled through the crowd. To lift the curse, he continued, 2 untouched maidens must carry the sacred offering to the altar of Afideo. If they are not found in 2 days, the gods will turn their backs, and Kuru will wither to dust. Now you must understand, the elders had never doubted their daughters. Not once. They believed purity still lived in every home, behind every curtain, within every girl's heart. And so, the village sent word, all maidens must gather at the palace square. The test of purity will decide. The next morning, Kuru awoke under a heavy sky. Girls, dressed in their finest wrappers and coral beads, stood in line as drums echoed through the earth. Agboji stepped forward with a large pot carved from sacred Iroko wood. Inside was the necklace of Nidi, a divine ornament said to rise only to the hands of a truly pure maiden. One by one, the girls approached, placed their hands inside, and came out empty. First, Amoka, then Edoora, then Busy, then Kem. Even Ashobi, the chief's own daughter, the one everyone once called the flower of Kuru, she too returned with her hands trembling and empty. The silence was unbearable. Mothers wept. Fathers shouted. Elders stared, hollow-eyed, their hearts breaking from the weight of shame. And then, the shouting began. This cannot be. The pot is broken. The gods are unfair. But the truth hung in the air like a rotting carcass. Until one girl screamed, "It's not our fault. It's Isime. She showed us. She made us forget." Suddenly the truth, that quiet, creeping truth, stood naked in front of us all. When the name Isime was spoken aloud, it was as if a dam broke. The murmurs turned into roars. Fingers pointed. Mothers gasped, fathers clenched their fists. Even the elders, once calm like still rivers, stood with rage flashing in their eyes. She brought the city's poison to our doorstep. She dressed like temptation and walked among our daughters. She turned our pride into shame. I watched from a distance as Isime stood still, her gold earrings catching the light one last time. But her eyes were no longer proud. They were wide, filled with fear and something else, regret. She opened her mouth to speak, but the voices drowned her. Her aunt, Mama Tola, collapsed in the dust, wailing. I should never have taken her in. Isime's parents arrived that very evening from the city. Her father, a stern man who had once called village life backward, was silent now. The shame in his eyes was deeper than any punishment. Her mother wept, her hands over her head, whispering, I should have raised her with roots, not wings. But it was too late. The damage was done. The village had no virgins left. The necklace had spoken. The gods had turned their faces away. So once again, the people gathered under the sacred Iroko tree. The oracle Agboji stepped forward, his staff planted firmly in the earth. We have angered the gods, he said. And they demand balance. A sacrifice must still be made, or Kuru will perish. A heavy silence. Since no pure maiden walks among us, Agboji continued, the one who led them into darkness must walk alone, and carry the offering herself. Heads turned. All eyes fell on Isime. She took a small step back. Her mouth trembled. But there was nowhere to run. This was not the city. This was Kuru. And the gods had spoken. Agboji raised the calabash high into the air, carved with the marks of the ancestors, filled with sacred offerings, kola, honey, feathers, and the blood of a white hen. You will carry this to the altar at Afideo, he said. You will walk alone through the forest of truth. For 2 days and 2 nights, you must not turn back. And only when the calabash touches the sacred stone will the gods hear our cry. Isime's father moved forward. She is still a child, he pleaded. She can't go alone. But the villagers shouted him down. She brought us here, now let her carry the curse. Isime stood in silence as the calabash was placed on her head. Her eyes no longer sparkled. Her shoulders dropped under the weight of judgment, not just of the people, but of the gods themselves. And so, just before dawn, with no song, no farewell, no one walking beside her, Isime entered the forest alone. The sun had barely risen when Isime stepped past the last hut in Kuru, the calabash balanced on her head like the very weight of her sins. Her feet met the red earth, dry and cracked, and then the mossy edges of the forest, the Igbo Afideo, forest of truth. No one followed her. No one waved goodbye. Not even her aunt. And so, she walked. At first, the forest was quiet. The trees, tall and ancient, whispered among themselves. Birds sang, but not for her. Their songs sounded distant, as if echoing from another time, a time before shame had touched the heart of Kuru. By midday, the sun pierced through the branches, casting strange shadows. Isime's fine sandals tore on the sharp roots. Her feet bled, but she didn't stop. The calabash must not fall. Each step she took, she remembered. She remembered the laughter of the village girls. How they'd watched her with wide eyes, how they'd begged her to show them how she walked, how she spoke, how she earned gifts from men. At the time, it had felt powerful. Like she was the queen of something new, bold, exciting, untamed. But now, that power was gone. Replaced with silence and sore limbs and a bitter taste in her mouth. That night, Isime slept curled beneath the roots of an iroko tree. She had no blanket, no fire, just the calabash beside her and the cold judgment of the moon above. And in her sleep, the ancestors came. Not in full form, no. Just whispers. You turned their eyes from the fire of wisdom. You offered them shadows and called it light. But the heart is not a market. What you sowed cannot be returned. She woke with tears on her face and dust in her throat. On the second day, the forest thickened. Vines reached out like fingers, and strange birds called from deep within. Isime's legs ached. Her stomach twisted with hunger. But still, she walked. Each step was a prayer now, not one she spoke aloud, but one her soul breathed. Forgive me. Forgive what I've done. Let Kuru live even if I must fade. And then, just before dusk, she saw it, the sacred altar of Afideo, carved from stone older than time, wrapped in moss and light. She fell to her knees. Her body gave way, but her spirit did not. With trembling hands, she placed the calabash on the altar and whispered the only words she had left. I see now. I see what I broke. Let this offering speak louder than my shame. As the calabash touched the stone, the wind around the altar shifted. It wasn't loud. No thunder. No lightning. Just a stillness, like the forest itself had exhaled. The vines called back. A bird chirped, one single, pure note. And somewhere deep in the earth, something unseen seemed to soften. Isime remained kneeling. She stayed that way for a long time, until her legs were numb and her eyes swollen from tears. When she finally stood, the weight she carried felt different. Lighter, yes, but not gone. She turned toward the path home. Back through the forest that had stripped her of pride and covered her in the truth. Her body was weak, but her spirit had changed, like fire passing through gold, melting away what did not belong. And as she stepped out from under the forest canopy and into the fields beyond, she saw something impossible. The cassava stalks, once brown and brittle, stood green again. The goats wandered the hills, bleating. Children played with sticks and laughter. The curse had lifted. But as Isime approached the edge of Kuru, the joy in the air turned cold. The villagers were gathered, waiting. They had seen the signs. They knew the gods had accepted the offering, but their eyes held no welcome. Elder Agboji stepped forward, staff in hand. His face, carved from stone. "The gods have heard you," he said. Kuru breathed again. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. "But this does not mean you are free," Agboji continued. "Redemption demands more than a journey. It demands a life lived in penance." And so, the elders pronounced their judgment. Isime was not to leave the village for 12 years. In that time, she would live alone in a small hut beside the shrine. She would carry every offering to the gods herself. She would maintain the altar, tend the sacred grounds, and serve in silence. "You will be the keeper of sacrifice," they said, "so that you never forget what yours cost us." Her parents begged for mercy. Her aunt wept. But the decision was final. The village needed healing. And healing, sometimes, begins with exile. So, Isime moved into the small mud hut beside the shrine. The once admired city girl became a shadow, unseen, unheard, forgotten by the people who once whispered her name with awe. And so the seasons turned. Isime remained in her small hut beside the shrine, a home no bigger than a storage room, with cracked walls and a roof that hissed in the rain. No one visited. Children were told not to speak her name. Mothers used her story like a warning. "You want to end up like Isime? Keep playing with fire." She wore plain wrappers now, her gold earrings long gone. Her laughter, once so loud, so defiant, was replaced by the quiet rustle of broomsticks as she swept the shrine grounds each morning. At dawn, she would collect herbs. At dusk, she would light the sacred fire. And every new moon, she would carry offerings on her head to the altar in the forest, the very path she once walked in shame, now walked in devotion. And though no one spoke it aloud, the village began to change. The girls who had once mimicked her now sat quietly at their mother's feet, weaving mats and learning old songs. The elders retaught the laws of Kuru. Fathers walked home earlier. Sons were taught respect. And always, Isime watched from afar. The pain of her punishment was not just the silence, it was the watching. Seeing others live freely, laugh, marry, raise children, while she remained alone. 12 long years, and each day was like stitching a broken cloth, thread by thread. But here's the thing, my child, even broken cloth can be made whole. Over time, something in Isime changed. She began to listen, not just to the elders, but to the land. To the spirits in the trees. To the voices of the women who came before her. She began to write her thoughts on banana leaves, leaving them at the altar. She prayed, not for herself, but for the girls of Kuru. That they would know beauty not in men's eyes, but in their own hearts. By the 8th year, a few mothers secretly sent her food. By the 9th, a girl left flowers at her doorstep. By the 10th, even the elders began to nod when they passed her. But still, no one spoke to her. Her penance was not yet done. And then, the 12th year came. It began like any other. Roosters crowed. Smoke curled from cooking fires. The river hummed its ancient song. But beneath it all, something was different. The air carried an expectation, like the village was holding its breath. At the council square, the elders gathered beneath the great baobab, the one they called Isime, king of stones. Chief Oduma was now grey and slow, his once booming voice now carried by quiet wisdom. Beside him stood Agboji, the oracle, older still, his beard long as a hunter's bowstring, but his eyes sharp like morning frost. They sent a boy to fetch Isime. She arrived quietly, wearing a wrapper of faded blue. Her hair was tied back. Her face, calm. Worn, yes, but peaceful, like a river that had learned to flow around the rocks. The people of Kuru gathered. No one spoke, but all watched. Agboji stepped forward. 12 years, he said, his voice like drums in fog. 12 years of silence. 12 years of service. 12 years of reflection. He looked at her, his gaze deep and unreadable. We cast you out so you would see. But in your exile, you helped us see. The gods have watched you, and so have we. Then he turned to the crowd. What shall we do with this daughter of Kuru? The silence that followed was heavy. And then, a voice from the back. Mama Njidika, who once scolded Isime loudly in the marketplace, stepped forward. She was once the shadow that fell on our daughters, she said. But she became the light that taught them truth. Another voice, Papa Adieu, once filled with pride and anger. My granddaughter walks tall because of the lesson Isime paid for. And then a third, from Ashabi herself, the chief's daughter, who now stood with a baby tied to her back. She taught me what power means. Not in the eyes of men, but in the strength to rebuild what you've broken. And just like that, the tide turned. The elders gathered again, whispering, weighing. Finally, Agboji raised his staff. Isime, he said, you may now leave the shrine. You may walk among us, not as a ghost of shame, but as a keeper of wisdom. A quiet gasp. Then murmurs. Then claps, soft at first, then strong, like rain returning after drought. Isime bowed her head, tears falling silently. But no one wiped them for her. She wiped them herself, because this, too, was part of her journey. After that day, the village of Kuru was never quite the same. The shrine, once feared, once silent, became a place of learning. Not just sacrifice, but wisdom. Isime stayed there by choice, even though she was free to leave. She welcomed young girls who came with questions about themselves, about the world, about the weight of their choices. She never scolded them. She listened. And when she spoke, she didn't use the voice of shame. She used the voice of experience. Of pain turned into purpose. Beauty fades, she would say, but the things you carry in your spirit, respect, honor, truth, those stay longer than gold. The elders began sending their daughters to spend 1 week each year in the shrine, learning from Isime. Not about fear, but about value. About how to walk in the world without losing yourself. Ashabi, now a woman, often returned to help her. Together, they created something new, a space where tradition and truth could live side by side. And as the years passed, a saying spread through Kuru, passed from lips to ears like a secret prayer. Let your daughters know Isime, not just what she did, but who she became. People from other villages began visiting. They wanted to learn how Kuru had healed, how it had faced its darkness and still chosen to grow. And at the heart of every story, every lesson, stood the girl from the city who once brought shame and became a pillar of strength. When Isime grew old, the village built a stone seat beside the shrine. Children would sit around her as she told her story, not for pity, but for purpose. I fell, she would say, but I learned how to rise. And now, so can you. And so, the tale of Kuru, the curse, the silence, the sacrifice, lived on. Not as a wound, but as a scar the village wore with pride. Because scars, my child, are not just reminders of pain, they are proof that healing happened. And Isime, she became more than her past. She became a story that stays.